How to play against the French defense. Game number 1. Just copy Garry Kasparov. This is a game between the great Garry Kasparov and the legendary Victor Korchnoi in 2001. Kasparov started this game with pawn to e4 and Korchnoi replied with his favorite defense, pawn to e6, the French defense. Kasparov replied with d4, d5, and he brings out his knight, the Paulsen variation. Korchnoi in this game played the classical variation. In the later videos we will see bishop to b4, the win-hour variation, and d takes e4, the exchange variation. Knight to f6, which Kasparov replied with bishop to g5, pinning the knight against the queen and threatening to play pawn to e5. And Korchnoi replies with bishop e7, unpinning the knight. Kasparov plays pawn to e5, knight to d7, and here it comes, the Chatard Alekhine attack by the great Garry Kasparov. This pawn sacrifice has been played for the first time by none other than the great Alexander Alekhine in 1914, and after him lots of grandmasters used this pawn sacrifice with great success. In this game, Garry Kasparov used this line against one of the best French specialists in the world, Victor Korchnoi. But to my surprise, Korchnoi in this game accepted the pawn sacrifice, which I am not a great fan of. In this position, black has better options like pawn to a6, preparing pawn to c5, because playing pawn to c5 at one instance, white just simply plays bishop takes e7, and after queen takes e7, white jumps with his knight to b5 and he threatens knight to d6 and knight c7, and probably black is simply lost here. So this is not possible for black. But pawn to a6 is a good move, preparing pawn to c5. White will reply with queen to g4, attacking the g7 pawn. Black can play pawn to h5, queen to g3, pawn to g6. And here a clever move by white, knight to e2, protecting the d4 square. And after c5, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, c3, white wants to play knight f3, probably long castle, with a slightly better position for white. But this is one of the options for black. Another option could be after h4, pawn to h6. And against this move, white can simply play bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, and pawn to f4. White wants to play knight to f3, queen d2, and long castle with a great position for white. But these moves are better for black. In this game, Korchnoi, after h4, just took on g5. He accepted the pawn sacrifice. Kasparov took back, and now the h file is open. Black has to take because white already has some threat like pawn to g6, queen to g4, queen to h5. So black took the pawn. And in this position, Kasparov played a very strong move. Before this game, white player usually plays something like knight h3 or knight f3, which also are decent moves. But in this game, Kasparov played a better move, queen to d3. He wants to take on h7 with queen and rook. So black has to defend this pawn. But to my surprise, Korchnoi replied with a very bad move, knight to c6. I didn't understand this move at all. Here, probably he should have played pawn to h6 and defending the pawn. And after knight h3, he can put his queen on h4 or e7. After queen e7, queen g3, white has a great initiative. For example, after g6, he can play knight to f4. He wants to play bishop d3, castle. Look at these lines, look at these weak squares. Even in some positions, we have knight takes d5, so it's a very dangerous position for black. But probably something like queen h4, knight to b5, knight to a6, and this is a very complicated position. After knight a6, white can simply play castle. White has a great initiative, and he might develop a very strong attack. But Korchnoi replied with knight to c6. Of course, he wants to sacrifice the pawn to take this pawn, but against this move, Kasparov just simply replied with knight to f3. And here, Korchnoi played queen to g6, which is a mistake. But if he had played queen e7, then white simply plays rook takes h7. And here, black just should play rook to g8, and white has a great position. After rook g8, he can simply play something like, okay, long castle. For example, after that, bishop e2, rook to h1. White has a great advantage in this position. But in the game Korchnoi played queen g6, he was happy to trade queens. But I guess he overlooked this simple idea for white. After queen takes g6, black cannot take this back with this one. Of course, Korchnoi saw this. But he was relying on f takes g6. But I guess he overlooked this idea. Knight to b5. White attacks the pawn on c7. and black cannot defend it, because if he plays king to d8, white will simply place knight to g5, and how about that? He will attack h7, f7, and e6, and black is completely lost. So in this position, after knight b5, Korchnoi just played king to e7, and Kasparov took, and after rook b8, he just retreats because black threatens to play pawn to a6, but Kasparov retreats, knight to b6, and here c3. Look at this pawn structure. Look at this beautiful pawn structure that no one can ruin. So in this position, Korchnoi played bishop to d7, bishop to d3, knight to a5, and here Kasparov plays b3, securing the c4 square. And probably the last mistake by Korchnoi. Here he could have played knight a to c4, and after something like b takes c4, he could have take back because there is a double attack here, but I guess Kasparov would have take, and knight d6, and after takes, white has a very better position. He has a dominant knight on d6, and here is so-called good knight versus bad bishop, so this is already very bad for black, but he should have tried this line. In the game, he just took on b5, and after bishop takes b5, he played pawn to h6. He wants to free his rook, and he wants to transfer his rook to f8 or d8, but surprisingly, Kasparov played knight h4, he attacks the pawn on g6. Korchnoi played rook h to c8, he is counting on if knight takes g6, king f7, and he will take on c3, which of course Kasparov will prevent this line, and after rook h to c8, Kasparov played another strong move, rook to h3, lifting the rook up, protecting this pawn on c3, and he wants to deliver his rook to e3, f3, or g3 in later stages of the game. Here Korchnoi played g5, and he was expecting, okay, Kasparov will go back, and I have a good position. Of course, if knight f3, he might have even g4, which it might be winning. Of course, white has rook g3, it might still continues, but it's very good for black. But in this position, Kasparov played knight to g6, which I guess surprised Victor Korchnoi, because he's probably said, hang on a second, I will just play king to f7, and where this knight will go, because if he plays bishop to d3, I will just simply take rook takes c3, or I will first play g4, and after rook g3, I will play rook takes c3, and later on I can play rook c8, I want to take on d3, and this position is very good for me. But suddenly, Kasparov here sacrificed his knight and played rook to f3 check. I guess Korchnoi at this position understood what happened, because if he plays king g8 and knight d7, he will just lose the rook and lose the game. So he took on g6, and after bishop to d3 check, he has to play king h5, and now rook to h3 check. White harasses the black king, king comes to g4, pawn to f3 check, and after king goes to f4, Kasparov replied with a very quiet move, king to f2. He wants to deliver checkmate with pawn to g3. Korchnoi replied with g4, and after g3, he resigned the game, because after king to g5, f4 will be checkmate, because this king has nowhere to go. All of these squares are covered by the white pieces. This is a modern brilliancy by Garry Kasparov. His accuracy in this game was something like 99.7%. He destroyed Victor Korchnoi, one of the strongest players in the history of chess. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope this line will be beneficiary for you in your later games against the French defense. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if this is the case, please like the video and write your thoughts and comments below this video, and enjoy chess and life.